All right, wanted to get some rapid thoughts out about the Houston Rockets' massive statement victory here in the NBA Cup with a win tonight against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And if we look up, all of a sudden, the Houston Rockets are the third best team in the Western Conference. I said this during the offseason. This season is going to be like Houston's OKC Thunder moment. So if we look at the OKC Thunder right now, obviously they are one of the best teams in the Western Conference. I think right now, as things stand, they actually have the number one seed in the West. I'd have to go back and look. But there was a period where it starts with them being in this rebuilding situation. They make the play-in tournament, so there's a little bit of promise about their future. And then the next season, they blow up and end up becoming the number one seed in the Western Conference and get to the playoffs and make a decent run. And now here they are with these expectations as a legitimate title contender in the West. If we look at the Rockets right now, this season is very reminiscent of what OKC was last season, where they showed a lot of promise in the first year of like this new era with Fred VanVleet and guys like that, Dillon Brooks being on the roster, along with their young guys, showed a lot of promise, missed the playoffs by a few inches or missed the play-in tournament by a few inches, but people knew there was something there. Now we're this season where they have established themselves as one of the best teams in the Western Conference. Again, similar to where the OKC Thunder were just last season. They had a year where they showed us a lot of promise. Then they come right back the next year, and they're one of the best teams in the West. That is where Houston is right now. The Rockets are literally where the Thunder were just last season. And one common denominator when it comes to getting a young team from being just a rebuilding team to actually being a really good team is getting them to buy in on the defensive end. Fact of the matter, right? Like if you are trying to get a young team to actually being a legitimate threat in whatever conference they're in, the way you are able to bridge that gap is get them to buy in defensively. You can have a ton of offensive talent. You can have a ton of really good young shot creators. But if there is no culture, if there is no identity, if there is no theme for that team, then it really means nothing at the end of the day. And you have a lot of young guys just out there trying to figure things out. But Ime Udoka's come in and he has established an identity for this team. Sure, the offense has been great. They have been getting great all-around production. If you look at games like tonight, amazing production all around. Dillon Brooks has a great game. Sengun has a great game. Like just amazing production from a number of guys out there on the floor. But the thing that separates this team, what's made them so elite this particular season, is their defense. If you can establish a strong defensive culture in a young team, I promise you, they're going to be really good. Look at the Thunder last season. They're one of the best defensive squads in the entire league. Look at the Orlando Magic last season and also this season. Now, obviously, right now, they're relatively unhealthy because Ben Carroll hasn't played. But look at them last season, right? They ended up making the playoffs and could have went to the second round. And they were able to bridge that gap between being just this really talented young rebuilding team to being actually a real good threat in the Eastern Conference because they established a strong defensive identity. Udoka comes in, establishes a strong defensive identity for this Rockets team. Yes, there's some veteran guys they added to the roster along with Sengun and Jalen Green. But fact of the matter, they bought in defensively, and that's where they are. That's why they're where they're at right now. Guys are doing an amazing job defending the perimeter. Like they have been swarming teams out there. If we look at this game here against Minnesota, forced Minnesota to shoot just 24% from the three-point line, 9 for 38, which indicates one of two things. Either Minnesota was getting good looks and they weren't knocking them down, or they were not getting high-quality three-point looks. And there were a lot of possessions where they were kind of settling when it comes to making shots or getting shots up from beyond the arc. Also on top of that, forced 17 turnovers. And there was a 7-point differential between Minnesota's turnovers and Houston's turnovers. So again, this strong indication that they're doing an amazing job when it comes to defending the perimeter. And like I said, when you establish this strong defensive culture, it rubs off. You have guys playing defense at a high level that you wouldn't really expect them to. Like Alperen Sengun this season, his defense has been amazing. That's not something I'd ever thought I'd say about him. And again, very underrated player coming out of the draft, really good skill set. He's been amazing. I never thought he was going to be an elite level defensive player. Was never really bad defensively, but I never thought he was going to be a high impact defender. And I'm not saying right now he's like all defensive level, but his defense has been really good. So when you establish that strong defensive identity, it rubs off on guys that weren't projected to really be great defenders at all. Look at Stephen Curry. Wasn't projected to be a great defensive player at any point early in his career, ends up being very solid on that end of the floor because the Warriors, especially under the Steve Kerr years, established a strong defensive identity. When you have a strong defensive identity, some guys who may struggle defensively, that rubs off on them and they improve. Trae Young was decent defensively back in 2021, really good as a team defender, making plays here and there because the Atlanta Hawks had a great team defense and a strong defensive culture. So like I said, if you have a strong defensive culture, it rubs off on the players, particularly the guys who are not known to be strong enough defensive players. And we're seeing it here with Sengun and a number of other guys. And there are some great individual defenders here on this team as well. You have Tari Eason, who didn't have an amazing offensive game tonight, but we all know what he's been doing defensively off the bench this season. You have Reed Shepherd, who actually saw a very interesting stat on his defense this season. Especially when he's guarding isolations. He's been a really, really solid isolation defender this season. Teams are going at him defensively in isolation scenarios, and he's done a pretty good job at guarding in those particular situations. And we kind of knew coming out of the draft that that was going to end up being one of his stronger suits, was his defense. So I saw the stat earlier today. Reed Shepherd so far this season has defended 14 isolations. Players are 3-11 in those ISO situations. Now, that's not accounting for this particular game. I'd have to go back and see what that stat looks like right now. But Reed Shepherd has come in defensively as a rookie, and he's done very, very well. Good job of getting deflections, strip steals, things like that. You also have Amen Thompson, who has been playing like an all defensive level player. Dillon Brooks had an amazing defensive possession late in this game in the overtime period. So many great individual defensive players on this team. They have set the tone. The reason they're good is because of their ability to defend at a high level. Again, if you want to bridge that gap between being a really good young team stuck in a rebuilding situation and actually being a real contender, not contender, a real elite threat in your conference, in a team that has some promise, get your team to buy in defensively. OKC Thunder, Orlando Magic, having a strong defensive identity can help you bridge the gap between just being a rebuilding young team to an actual good young team, a team that is a legitimate threat in whatever conference they're playing in. And Ime Udoka understands that. And this also speaks to how great of a defensive mind that Udoka is. Rarely in his head coaching career, and by rarely I mean never, has there been a situation where Ime Udoka was coaching a lackluster defense. Never. Remember back in Boston where they made the finals in 2022? That first round defense they played against the Brooklyn Nets that series was some of the best defense I've ever seen. And that defense reached historic levels. Fast forward to now, and the Rockets are an elite level defensive team. Not just this season, but also last season, they were really good defensively. So Ime Udoka establishing himself as one of the better defensive minds and defensive motivators as far as head coaching goes in the NBA. And he has been the perfect fit for this team. It's awesome seeing him do well in like this second head coaching stint, showing that the Celtic stuff wasn't just a fluke. And I think it's more impressive now that he's working with a lot of young guys who haven't really experienced the playoffs at all. Because once he got to Jaylen Brown and Tatum and head coached them, they had already made multiple conference finals appearances. Now you're coaching a squad where there are a couple of guys who have deep playoff experience, and you have one guy that has a ring in Fred VanVleet. But essentially, you're coaching up a young group where your two best guys, arguably, in Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, are young and have never even sniffed the postseason. So great stuff here from the Rockets. Impressive win in the NBA Cup. And we'll see how consistent they can stay as the season progresses here.